Snowflakes tumbled from the sky in relentless sheets, settling onto the cracked pavement and melting against the worn leather of the little girl's boots. The boots had once belonged to someone larger, perhaps her mother, and now flopped awkwardly against her small ankles, leaving gaps where the cold bit at her skin. She pulled the frayed scarf tighter around her neck, though it did little to stop the chill that seeped deep into her bones. In her arms, she cradled a bundle of thin blankets, their edges damp from the snow. Within them, her baby brother whimpered, his tiny fists clutching at the air, his cry faint and strained as though he no longer had the strength to wail properly. The little girl bent her head down, whispering against the baby's damp forehead, trying to steady her own voice even as her teeth chattered. "Shish! Don't cry, I'll keep you safe, I promise." Her words were shaky, but her eyes shone with determination far beyond her years. She had no one left to turn to. The streets had been her world for days now, ever since the morning she had shaken her mother's arm and found only silence. She hadn't had time to grieve. The baby needed her, and she couldn't waste a second. Her gaze lifted to the building ahead, towering like a golden fortress against the dark night. Its glass walls shimmered with warm light, spilling onto the snow and making it glow. People walked inside, their laughter echoing faintly as they passed through the revolving doors. Men in fine coats, women in fur collars, faces flushed with comfort and cheer. Not one of them looked outside, not one of them noticed the small figure standing in the storm. The girl's breath fogged against the glass as she pressed her nose against the cold surface, peering inside at the marble floor that gleamed under chandeliers. She could almost feel the heat radiating from within, almost imagine what it would be like to sink into one of those leather chairs she had glimpsed through the window, to feed her brother something warm instead of clutching him desperately against her chest for heat she barely had. The guards at the entrance noticed her finally. Their eyes narrowed, and one of them shifted forward, his gloved hand lifting as though to wave her away. Fear shot through her, but desperation was stronger. She tightened her grip on the baby and stumbled forward into the falling snow, her small body shaking as she cried out, "Please. Please, just one night. My baby, he's cold." Her voice cracked against the wind, yet it carried through the glass doors into the lobby. People turned their heads, their conversations faltering. Some frowned in irritation at the disturbance, others looked away as though pretending they hadn't heard. But among them was a man whose presence seemed to part the crowd without effort. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he walked with an air of authority that made others step aside. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble, and his eyes were cold steel, the kind of eyes that had built empires and crushed competitors without hesitation. Assistants trailed behind him, carrying files and murmuring about meetings, but he moved as if the world bent to his pace. The girl's gaze locked onto him. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, though she didn't know why. Perhaps it was the way everyone deferred to him, the way even the guards seemed to stiffen at his approach. Perhaps it was simply that he looked powerful, and in her desperate mind, power meant the ability to help. Before she could think further, she dropped to her knees in the snow, ignoring the icy wetness seeping into her tights. The bundle in her arms squirmed and let out a thin cry. She clutched him closer, lifting her face so the man might hear. Her eyes brimmed with tears, half from the sting of the wind, half from the raw pleading in her heart. "Please," she begged again, her voice breaking. "I don't want anything else. Just somewhere warm for him. Just one night." The lobby stilled as though time itself had paused. The guards hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to drag her away or wait for a command. The assistants glanced nervously at one another, whispering about lost schedules and reputations. But the CEO, the man everyone looked to, had stopped in his tracks. His eyes fixed on the little girl kneeling in the snow, her small frame shaking, her lips blue, her arms wrapped fiercely around the crying baby. For a long moment, no one breathed. The snow continued to fall, the city hummed beyond the glass walls, but all attention was pinned on the sight of a desperate child at the mercy of a man known for never bending. And in that stillness, her words seemed to echo louder than the storm itself. The man's polished shoes stopped inches away from where the girl knelt, half buried in the snow. Everyone inside the lobby seemed to hold their breath, waiting for his reaction. He was a man whose decisions could turn fortunes overnight, whose single word could dismiss employees or close deals worth millions. No one ever saw hesitation in him, yet, for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes as he studied the girl and the fragile bundle she clutched. "Stand up," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of command. It was not a barked order, nor a kind suggestion, just an expectation that could not be refused. The little girl's legs shook as she forced herself upright, the snow clinging to her thin clothes, her fingers numb from clutching the baby so tightly. She stood unsteadily, still half hunched over the child in her arms. Her breaths came in short, visible bursts, each one clouding the freezing air between them. The CEO's eyes shifted to the infant, wrapped in damp cloth, his face flushed from cold. Then back to the girl. "Why are you out here alone?" She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Her first instinct was to stay silent, grown-ups rarely listened. But something about his tone, about the way the entire world seemed to be waiting for her reply, pushed her to speak. Our mother, she didn't wake up this morning." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I didn't know where to go. I just needed somewhere warm, for him." She glanced down at the baby, her arms tightening around him as though shielding him from the judgment in the man's eyes. Her words struck the air like a stone in still water. Behind the CEO, his assistant shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing to usher him away from the scene, to remind him of his waiting car, his schedule, his board meeting in 30 minutes. But the man didn't move. He simply stared at the girl, his jaw tightening. Unbidden, memories crept into his mind, nights spent on icy streets, stomach hollow with hunger, his hands cracked from cold. Nights when he too had begged, his voice ignored by people who walked faster, pretending he didn't exist. He had promised himself he would never be that helpless child again. And he had kept that promise, turning himself into the kind of man no one could overlook. But now, staring at this trembling girl, it felt like looking into a mirror of the past. He shrugged off his coat suddenly, a heavy wool garment that had cost more than the girl could imagine, and with a smooth motion, he draped it across her narrow shoulders. The weight of it nearly swallowed her whole, but warmth immediately wrapped around her. She gasped softly, blinking up at him in disbelief. The lobby erupted in whispers. Never had anyone seen the CEO display such an act of softness. He was known for precision, ruthlessness, and a disdain for weakness. Yet here he was, lowering himself enough to cover a beggar child with his own coat. "Bring them upstairs," he ordered his assistant without looking away from the girl. The assistant stammered, "Yes sir, your meeting." "Cancel it." His tone left no room for argument. The guards who had been ready to drag the child away now stepped aside, their expressions uncertain, almost ashamed. The girl looked between the imposing man and the doors that were now being held open for her, her disbelief making her hesitate. "Go on," he said quietly, and for the first time, his voice softened, losing its edge. She adjusted the coat around her and shifted the baby higher in her arms, stepping carefully onto the marble floor as though afraid she might be turned back any moment. The warmth hit her instantly, making her eyes sting with tears. She bit her lip, fighting to keep them from falling, and whispered, "Thank you." But the man did not answer. He had already turned away, one hand slipping back into his pocket, his face carved into stone once more. Yet his pace was slower now, his stride measured, as though he wanted to ensure the girl had no trouble keeping up behind him. The people in the lobby parted, watching silently as the most powerful man in the building walked ahead, a ragged little girl trailing in his shadow, clutching her baby brother. It was a picture none of them would forget, a reminder that even the coldest winter could be pierced by a single, unexpected act of mercy. The penthouse suite stretched out in quiet luxury, its wide windows overlooking the snowstorm that raged across the city. The skyline glittered faintly, blurred by the heavy curtain of flakes, but inside the room there was warmth. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, its glow softening the sharp lines of the modern furniture. Thick rugs cushioned the marble floor, and the faint scent of cedarwood hung in the air. The little girl sat close to the fire, her baby brother finally asleep in her lap. His tiny chest rose and fell evenly, wrapped now in a soft, dry blanket far warmer than anything she had owned before. She rocked him gently, though he no longer needed soothing, the rhythm more for her own comfort than his. Every few moments, she glanced around the enormous room, her eyes wide as though she could not believe she was truly here. The coat draped around her shoulders was still too heavy, but she pulled it tighter, relishing the unfamiliar sensation of heat against her skin. Behind her, the CEO stood by the window, his hands tucked into his pockets, his tall frame outlined against the frosted glass. He did not speak, but his reflection stared back at him in the dark pane, a face he had crafted into something unyielding, untouchable. Still, his gaze lingered on the snow outside, and memories flickered like ghosts in the storm, Cold nights, empty stomachs, the hopeless pleading of a child ignored. He had buried those nights beneath decades of work, building walls of steel and success around himself. Yet tonight, they came rushing back with cruel clarity. The girl hesitated before speaking, her voice soft and trembling. "We'll leave tomorrow, I promise. Just tonight is enough." She lowered her head, as though afraid her presence might already be too much of a burden. Gratitude laced her words, but also fear, the fear of being told she had overstayed her welcome. He turned at last, his eyes narrowing slightly, though not in anger. His voice was measured, even, but there was something underneath it that no one in his company boardrooms had ever heard before. "Do you really think I'd let you walk back out into that storm?" Her eyes widened. "But, why would you care? You don't even know me." He studied her for a long moment. She was fragile, trembling, her cheeks still red from frostbite, yet her back was straight, her arms protective over the baby in a way that spoke of courage far beyond her years. She reminded him so much of himself at that age, helpless, yes, but never willing to surrender. His throat tightened, and he forced himself to answer. "Because I know exactly what it feels like to beg in the snow and be ignored." The words slipped out like a confession, heavy and raw. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire. The girl blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The man who stood before her, polished and powerful, spoke with the voice of someone who had once known her pain. He moved closer, kneeling down until he was at her level. It was an action unthinkable to those who worked under him. This man did not kneel for anyone. Yet here he was, lowering himself before a child who had nothing. His eyes, so often cold and calculating, softened as he looked at her and then at the baby in her arms. "You and your brother won't spend just one night here," he said, his voice low but steady. "From now on, you'll never have to beg again." The girl's lips parted, but no words came. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she clutched the baby tighter, the reality of his promise sinking in. She had expected rejection, at best a fleeting kindness, but not this, never this. Her small shoulders shook with sobs she had been holding back for days, and she buried her face against her brother's blanket. For years, the CEO had prided himself on his iron will, on never letting emotion interfere with decisions. Yet now, watching the girl cry with relief, he felt a warmth spread through his chest, a warmth that no fire could create. It unsettled him, but it also soothed something deep and long neglected inside him. He rose slowly, placing a hand on the back of the chair beside her as if to steady himself. His voice carried once more, firmer this time, the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You'll stay here, both of you. You'll eat, you'll rest, and you'll be safe. That's not a request, it's a decision." The girl lifted her tear-streaked face, nodding weakly, unable to believe such words were meant for her. Outside, the storm howled against the windows, relentless and cold. But inside that penthouse, for the first time in a long while, warmth did not come only from the fire. It came from an unexpected bond formed in the harshest of circumstances, a bond that would change all of their lives forever.